A tweet from RFK Jr. has announced his understanding of what the Democratic National Committee is doing to his approach to try to be president of the United States under the banner of the Democratic Party. He tweets and says, "The DNC is rigging the primary. Here's how." Let's go ahead and get into it.
DNC does not want a primary. They're effectively disenfranchising the Democratic voters from having any choice in who becomes the Democratic nominee. So two of the things they've done today, they've made rules that if any candidate sets foot in the state of Iowa or sets foot in the state of New Hampshire, then none of the votes that are cast for that candidate will be tallied. In other words, any delegate that I win in New Hampshire or Iowa would go instead to the president. And now they're trying to change it so that if I campaign in New Hampshire, that none of the votes cast for me in Georgia will count. And that's significant because it's hard to win the nomination without Georgia. If you add up all the superdelegates that they control and all of the automatic delegates that just go to the party and go to the president, I would have to win almost 80% of all of the states in order to beat President Biden, even if he only wins 20%. You know, we live at a time in American history when a lot of Americans think that democracy is broken, that the political system is rigged, and that there's not really any democracy. And unfortunately, the DNC is taking a lot of steps that confirm that outlook. If you like this video and you want to help me become president of the United States, go to Kennedy24.com and donate now.
So, if Kennedy seems like someone you would support and you genuinely like what he has to say in his message, go ahead and support his campaign. I will never be using this to promote specifically one person for president. I will say who I'm interested in and who intrigues me and who I may vote for, but I will never be pushing people to do exactly what I deem necessary, because that's not how we operate in a free society. What happens is I need to convince you with the merit of my ideas, and with that, hopefully you will agree with me in the end, and if we vote, we will vote the same way. Let's go ahead and jump in, and we see Brett Weinstein says the DNC fears RFK far more than it fears Trump. That should tell you something. This is from Texas Lindsay. It says RFK Jr. calls out DNC's corrupt scheme to re-elect Biden and how he plans to disrupt it. So, I wouldn't say that I'm sure that the DNC fears RFK Jr. more than they fear Trump. Trump is definitely the bull in the china shop, but what they definitely fear is RFK. So here's the deal. When you listen to RFK Jr. speak, it sounds like he's actually read a book about something. I'm going to go ahead and steal something from Dave Smith real quick. When RFK goes ahead and speaks about a topic, it feels like he's read a book on it. Not just that he's read multiple books on it, and that he's thought deeply about this subject, and that's why he's giving you his nuanced perspective on something. When you listen to Donald Trump talk, Donald Trump talks about things like he watched a TV show about it. Like, he saw something, a clip on YouTube, and he was like, oh, I want to watch a piece of that thing that actually is kind of interesting. And then he just kind of runs with it. That's how Donald Trump seems to approach a situation. Granted, I'd argue that's probably one reason why people like Donald Trump, because he just takes it and runs with it no matter what it is. It doesn't really matter. Nonetheless, let's go ahead and jump into this clip.
Hi, I'm Robert F. Kennedy Jr. here. After 4 months of crisscrossing the country and speaking to thousands of Americans from all walks of life, I've come to understand that what our campaign really is the spearhead of a massive populist awakening. You see, our nation's most serious problems come from a single source: the entrenched corporate political elite. Government agencies, Congress, the defense industry, Wall Street, the media, big tech, big pharma, big ag, and pretty much big everything have a death grip on our democracy. And there's only one thing that can break that grip. And no, it's not me. It's you, the people. It's a populist movement that unites left and right, black and white, rural and urban, young and old. We can't just wait around for the Washington establishment to change their minds. We can't expect Wall Street to stop strip mining the middle class of its equity and its wealth. We can't expect the military-industrial complex to promote peace, or the censorship big tech complex to promote freedom or freedom of speech. We need to do it ourselves. We have to take back power in this country for the people. Let me add one more item to the list of entrenched institutions, the Democratic National Committee. In an honest primary, the candidate with the most votes would be the nominee, right? But the DNC has imposed delegate rules that make it nearly impossible for an insurgent candidate to win. It has totally rigged the system.
Very early on, back in February, we passed a resolution unanimously within the DNC that we are all riding with Biden and Kamala Harris.
But you know what? Neither the DNC nor anyone else is going to stop us. President Biden's billion-dollar war chest is not a match for people power ultimately. That's why we're opening field offices in all 50 states. My campaign will be funded by millions of small donations from people who want to heal this nation. Now is a great time to make a donation to my campaign. Even $5 or $10 contributes to our momentum. Thank you, everyone, and God bless you.
Okay, so, like I said, if you want to support his campaign, you feel free to do so. I haven't given any money to anyone's campaign. I'm not really someone who is sold on the whole metric of politics being a reasonable way to achieve the end goals that we see to make a prosperous society. But it is great to have people like RFK Jr. speaking truth to power. He's absolutely right when he talks about the problem of the entrenched corporate elite and how this is what has overtaken society. This goes perfectly with the process of the understanding of Thomas Sowell's Anointed. Okay, we jump in and we see this is from Wall Street Silver. They don't want you to know this. RFK explains how BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard own a huge portion of the S&P 500. They're also purchasing large numbers of homes in the USA. RFK Jr. claims that by 2030, they could own 60% of single-family homes in America. These are the conversations that need to be had. And when I hear RFK Jr. talking about things like this, I realize that these are the major issues that Donald Trump just doesn't understand. And if he does, he never talks about them. And if that's the case, why doesn't he talk about them? But I'd argue it's because it's so far off of Trump's radar, because everything on Trump's radar has to do with what's best for him. And I understand there are going to be people saying, no, Trump cares so much about America. And I'd argue he does care about America. But I'd argue he cares as much about America as he does about himself. And that is one thing that is huge, because his ego is tied to the value of how great America is now perceived. And with that, he will push to make America great so he can be perceived as great. Donald Trump's rhetoric on things like the vaccine and how poorly he handled COVID, giving Dr. Fauci a presidential commendation. If you go ahead and watch his Megyn Kelly interview that he recently had, you'll realize he's dropping the ball consistently in many areas. Donald Trump never wants to admit for a fault, and I get that this is a tactic that he's used consistently for years. Never admit to a fault, always divert it to someone else, always blame the other guy. But that's not what you want in a leader. Let's go ahead and jump into RFK.
More importantly, there's three giant corporations, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, which own collectively, they own each other, so it's really one giant corporation, but they also own 89% of the S&P 500. They own everything. They've now decided to buy every single family home in America. So if they stay on the current trajectory, they will own 60% of the homes in this country, single family homes, by 2030. They literally are trying to buy everything. And the head of it, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, is on the board of the World Economic Forum. And what they've said, we want this great reset, which is you will own nothing and you will be happy. Well, they're on their way to making sure that we don't own anything. So you all probably have heard of people who are about to buy a home, and somebody comes in at the last minute with a cash or offer and snatches it out of the market.
Right.
And it's usually an LLC with an ambiguous name. But if you trace that up, you'll find it's owned by BlackRock.
Wow.
If you trace that up, you'll find it's owned by BlackRock. And I've actually seen these consistently. So at my dad's house, what you'll see is there are these pamphlets that get delivered like once every month or two in the mail. And when I see them, I used to just think nothing of it. And immediately, once I started reading about ESG and corporate capture and then the process of buying out homes, and which is what was causing the massive skyrocketing rate in the price of people's homes and their rent, well, it's driven by massive institutional investors like Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street. And if you don't understand this, these companies, like you said, own 80% of the S&P 500, but they also own denominational controlling shares of each other. They own roughly 11% of each other, and with that, I don't know if anyone understands this, but 11% is only 7 delineations away from 100 in any efficient system that's going to be ramping up exponentially. So with that, that means that they control large portions of everything that happens in the market, and this is how they're able to curtail what people want to see in the market. And when I say people want to see, I mean what the elites want to see. Do you think all of this stuff that started getting pushed around randomly out of nowhere after the crash of the Occupy Wall Street movement and the Tea Party movement, when you started to see all of these massive cultural divisions being pushed, what happened during Occupy Wall Street? You had the left-wingers and the right-wingers coming together to talk about the fact that the bankers were destroying society. It's the 99% versus the 1%. It's the people who don't own banks versus the people who own the banks, is what they were screaming. And then what happened? They sent all their rich white executives to diversity training. They bought off the left, and the left went from screaming about the problem of the war state and the military-industrial complex and the banking institutions to now at pride parades in 2023 waving Bank of America flags, holding Lockheed Martin banners, and walking around screaming the virtues of Chase because they have a diversity and equity board. It's unbelievable how quick this cultural pivot happened, and it absolutely was disseminated from the top down to control the populace. Let's go ahead and jump in. We have another clip from RFK, and this is from Vigilant Fox. I would highly recommend giving Vigilant Fox a follow on Twitter. What we see is RFK Jr. plugs Oliver Anthony's rich men north of Richmond, saying the whole system is rigged. The whole system is rigged against you and these corporations, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, because of government collusion with these rich men north of Richmond, have their boots on the neck of every American, declared RFK Jr. And all these guys, politicians, can talk about what is going on in China, what to do to Russia, and how to make up boogeymen that keep the military-industrial complex in the cash. But what is really happening is this country, its wealth is all being stolen by corporations and cooperation with government agencies. We need to start actually talking about the real issues, and it's not happening. And that's absolutely true. And this is one reason I'm so excited to see someone like RFK genuinely jump into the race and have these conversations, because he's going to be a major cultural figure when it comes to pushing the narrative, and I would argue shifting the Overton window more back to sanity when it comes to the Democrats, because they've gone so far off the reservation when it comes to the insanity that they're pushing from the top-down metrics that the state is being used as an apparatus of control, as it usually is, but now they're doing it to go after what they consider their domestic enemies rather than just their foreign ones. Considering that the FBI has now marked parents who are going to school board meetings who disagree with the LGBT propaganda being pushed onto children as domestic terrorists. If that isn't proof that the institutional powers that run your government see you as nothing more than a threat, I don't know what is. Let's go ahead and play RFK.
I want to point something out, that these three giant companies, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, they own 88% of the S&P 500. There's something wrong with that. And they've now targeted single-family homes. So the reason you're seeing these homes, go off the charts in price, so many people that you know and I know have had the experience that they're about to put an offer in on the home, or they put one in. Somebody swoops in with a cash offer and takes it away from them, and they try to figure out who it is. It's an LLC. Well, those LLCs are ultimately owned by those three big companies. And, they're on trajectory now to own 60% of the single-family homes in this country by 2030. There's a lot of things that we ought to be doing about that. We ought to be using the tax code so that they can't make a killing taking all the homes and then driving up the rents. And there's other things that we can be doing, and making mortgages available, 3% mortgages to Americans with federal guarantees. None of that is happening. And nobody's even talking about what's really going on in this country, which is this corrupt collusion between state and corporate power that is strip mining the wealth from the American middle class and destroying the lives of the working poor in this country, where you do not have a chance anymore. The whole system is rigged against you. And those corporations, because of government collusion with these rich men north of Richmond, have their boots on the neck of every American. And, all these guys can talk about is what China's going to do to us, and Russia, and make up these bogeymen to keep the military-industrial complex in the cash. But what about what's really happening in this country, which is, the wealth is being stolen by corporations with the cooperation of these government agencies. And we need to start actually talking about the real issue, and it's not happening.
Man, I cannot think of a politician that is actually having these conversations and talking about this stuff outside of someone like, I don't know, Joshua Smith, who's running for the LP, and then Michael Rechtenwald, who was recently announced to be running for the LP. These are the only people I can see really talking about these things. And then we have Vivek Ramaswamy. But even then, Vivek Ramaswamy and RFK kind of sidestep certain issues and miss certain things that each other are good on, which I would argue a conversation between the two, being able to feather out those issues and then being able to see what is the best metric of how we accomplish solving these certain problems. I think a conversation between those two would be absolutely incredible. To be a fly on the wall in that room would be something that I greatly desire. All right, we've got these articles, what we have from the Daily Caller. Let's go ahead and jump into them, talking about the fact of what's going on with RFK. We have two articles that we'll be going through from the Daily Caller, roughly just going over what we've talked about and what RFK Jr. has had to say in these clips, but I wanted to get some actual media coverage on this so we could go ahead and go through a couple articles. So here's the deal. If you want to actually have some really good media coverage to get some honest and fairly objective reporting when it comes to things that are happening at places like the U.S. border down in Texas, well, the Daily Caller does fantastic reporting on this. They send journalists down and they send investigative reporters down to go explore, see everything that's going on, and they're actually one of the ones that broke the stories of how the color-coded wristbands were being used to show the different degrees of how people were being shuffled through these different systems that the cartels were using to traffic people across the border. Okay, let's go ahead and get in. RFK Jr. claims DNC created new rules to steal votes from other candidates. Presidential candidate RFK Jr. told the Forbes newsroom on Thursday that the Democratic National Committee is inventing new rules to ensure that any votes for other candidates default to President Joe Biden. And much like how we see the intelligence agencies operating in other countries, in order to save democracy, what we must do is destroy democracy. RFK Jr. made the statement during a conversation with Forbes assistant managing editor Diane Brady that they are incredibly damning to the DNC. Kennedy appears to describe as a highly rigged process that would literally take away the voting rights of democratically aligned American citizens. RFK Jr. claimed that the new process would make it almost impossible to have democracy function and would rob Democratic voters of any choice who becomes the 2024 nominee for the Democrats. So here's the deal. I'm not a fan of democracy in the first place because I see it as being a metric to control the systems that people operate under when it comes to the political levers of power. So I'm not really that big of a fan because in the end, democracy is supposed to be about supporting the minority, but it's still something that's driven by majority rule. So it's functionally broken at that face. Okay. What we see is this is the interview from Forbes. It says Robert F. Kennedy Jr. blasts DNC's rigged process. This will go ahead and be right here. I watched this roughly 2 days ago. If you want to go ahead and watch the interview yourself, it will be in the link in the description down below in the first Daily Caller article. You can go watch it yourself. Well worth your time. Put it on while you do something around the house. Let's go ahead and continue. They've made rules that if any candidate sets foot in the state of Iowa or sets foot in the state of New Hampshire, then none of the votes are cast for that candidate and will be tallied. In other words, any delegate that I win in New Hampshire, Iowa would instead go to President Biden. RFK Jr. said during the interview, if you had to add up all the super delegates that they control and all the automatic delegates that go to the party, I would have to win almost 80% of all the states. And democracy being something that's supposed to be driven by 50 plus 1% of the vote, well, that doesn't really make any sense. And also, if you have an understanding of how given control of systems work, if you have 11% of any given system, you can have institutional control over it based on the levers of power you can exert. And this actually goes with what I was saying earlier about how companies like Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street own roughly 11% of each other because it gives them controlling interests over large portions of the actions that are being taken, because there are many people who do not own up to 10% of these massive companies because of how much money it would cost to have all of these assets. Okay. Moving on, we see the rules may not come into full effect. If they do, we'll find out on September 14th. It's just so unclear why the DNC would be so obvious in their rigging of the 2024 presidential primary. Not even Democrats want Biden to run in 2024, citing his age, horrific economic policy, and utterly empty professional record during his time in office, other than sending billions to Ukraine while essentially ignoring citizens suffering under natural disasters here at home. And what we see is Democrats in Iowa and New Hampshire have slammed the DNC after their new rules push back their first in the nation nominating contest to give South Carolina the earliest date. And the fact is that if RFK Jr. won roughly 80% of the votes and still didn't win the tally for the Democratic National Convention, I don't know what to say. Would anyone actually have any value in believing democracy? I'm going to go ahead and let a kitten in just a moment. 1 second. Okay, moving on. Cat is now on the bed. So, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. warns one giant corporation wants to own 60% of U.S. homes by 2030, but can we stop them? Possibly, unsure, but I will admit his approach and how he wants to get it done is quite fascinating. A video shared Monday by hugely popular Wall Street Silver account on Twitter showed 2024 presidential candidate RFK Jr. warning most Americans the country's real estate will be owned by one corporation by 2030, which goes along with the 2030 agenda and the Great Reset that you will own nothing and you will be happy. RFK explained how our corporate overlords, who control far more of the world than even the World Economic Forum's leadership, are attempting to purchase upwards of 60% of U.S. single-family homes by 2030. There are three giant corporations, BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, which we've already heard this clip, but it says, which own collectively each other. And with this, it's really one giant corporation, but they also own 89% of the S&P 500. They own everything. So here's the deal. If you're effectively just one giant corporation with massive institutional control over so many of the different levers of the economic processes that so many different businesses have to travel so they can make money and be relevant in the market, well, it seems like what we have is a monopoly. And we have monopoly laws on the books, but the monopoly laws we have on the books are not set up to deal with these massive mega institutional conglomerates like we see with State Street, BlackRock, and Vanguard. So what we see is RFK went on to note how BlackRock CEO Larry Fink, who is on the board of the WEF, is part of a cabal pushing for the Great Reset. And if you want to watch this clip, go ahead and go back and go watch it in this video, or you can go ahead and click the link in the description. You will find this article as well as the clips. It says, the Democratic presidential candidate went on to note that all of us know someone or multiple people who have found it impossible to purchase a home at a reasonable value because they keep getting outbid at random by any random company. When you trace the majority of these companies back through the corporate ladder, they all end up with one of three mentioned names that were established earlier. And that's all I'm going to go ahead and have for this. Thank you for watching this far. Do not trust the Democratic establishment. Do not trust the Republican establishment, because the establishment is nothing more than a den filled with snakes that are willing to play crabs in a bucket to pull everyone down so they themselves can succeed. And with that comes the fact that you cannot trust any of these people at the levers of power. Okay, thank you for watching. Go ahead and give RFK a follow. Follow him on Twitter. Donate to his campaign if you want to support him. Thank you for watching. If you tell me anything where I'm wrong in the comment section down below, I'll gladly go ahead and look at all of the information you can provide me so I can counter my own beliefs, so I can actually have a proper understanding of what people who disagree with me have to say. But you'd actually have to provide me some proper counter information. Thank you for watching. Thumbs up if you liked it. Thumbs down if you didn't. Stay lovely. Stay great. Peace out.